welcome to episode 22 of the Silver Savage podcast. This episode is brought to you by Masada Tactical. As always, if you're looking for the absolute best training in self-defense, firearms, trauma care, security, and so much more, you should check training.masadatactical.com. And if you choose to sign up, use the code SilverSavage10 to get 10% off. This episode is also brought to you by Combat Iron Apparel. I know I can't stop hyping them up, but it is only because I truly believe in their products. As a matter of fact, for my own wedding last weekend, Combat Iron Apparel printed a limited series of silkies just for us, and they were amazing. I may actually post some pictures because they were so cool. Go visit combatironapparel.com and use the code SilverSavage10 to get 10% off when you check out. This week we have with us Brian Hodges. I'm going to go off script here for a second, and instead of reading the bio he sent us, which will be posted in the actual notes, also on all the social media announcements of this episode, I'm going to say I met Brian when I was teaching or co-teaching firearms class at the War Operator 1 class through IWI in Pennsylvania, and we started chit-chatting, and he told me he's a leadership consultant. First of all, I wanted to know what a leadership consultant actually does, but the second thing, being an entrepreneur myself, I was obviously intrigued about what he had to say. So we invited him to be on the podcast, and not knowing Brian very well, I really thought this would be maybe a 30-40 minute podcast. We ended up having so much fun. It ended up being over twice as long, and honestly, we just cut it short because we didn't want to hold Brian for way too long. Aside from being a leadership consultant, and we talk about it in the podcast, he's also into motorcycles, woodworking, firearms, obviously, staying in shape, and he's been a very cool dude to hang out with and chit-chat as we're going through it. So here's a little talk with Brian Hodges. All right, Brian, we actually get three of us today.
Wow.
Yep.
A menage.
Look at the beards, dude. Check out that.
It's funny you said that. I was trying to be professional because I'm meeting Brian for the first time. But he popped on that screen and I was lost. Like, I could not stop staring at that beard. And I was like,
talk about how Brian and I met in a minute, but the first thing that attracted me to him, I mean, we're sitting in a classroom and I'm just fixated. I'm like, I want to be like that.
Listen, in the last 3 seconds, I was picturing my fingers running through that beard. And I'm like, I'm just meeting this guy for the first time. Let me not.
and Brian, just so you know, we have a guest host with us today, Paul. Paul and I are actually in Georgia teaching, and he was here and he heard that we're doing this. And he's like, can I sit in? I'm like, sure you can.
Awesome.
Brian is a retired cop.
Sit in, on, around, under, and through.
Yeah, whatever. He's sitting. But he's a retired cop from North Carolina, and he was on a bomb squad for Marine. So it does certainly fit our podcast crowd.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Nice to meet you, Paul.
You too, Brian. So Paul, you good? You good? Can we get rolling? All right. So Brian, Brian, before we start, you and I met at an IWI Tavor operator class.
Yep.
Which was freaking cold, and I don't do cold, and I didn't expect it, and I had no jacket, which was even worse. But we got to talking, and I asked you what you were doing, and you said you're a leadership consultant.
Yes.
And you hear a lot about it, but honestly, I don't know really what you guys do. And we started chit-chatting a little bit, and it sounded fascinating. And I thought, listen, I think every organization or even a team or an entity like a family can benefit from some good leadership skills, right?
Yeah.
And ask you to come on the show. So how about you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, about your background, where you're from, and how'd you get to do what you're doing?
Yeah. Simply put, I'm a really lucky guy. I get to operate as a leadership consultant. And in essence, what I do is I help companies develop their leadership teams for better performance of the organization overall, for a healthier team, higher performance, more employee engagement, and that kind of thing. And what I find is that a lot of my clients have leaders that were great technicians. They were great operators, and they tap them on the shoulder and they're like, hey, you know that thing that you're really good at? You're not doing that anymore. We're going to have you put you in this management role. We don't have a lot of support systems for you, and we don't really know how to tell you how to do it, but wish you all the best, and looking forward to seeing what you're getting. And so, yeah, so it's like I come in and I help them with some of the basics, whether it's thinking strategically, whether it's communicating and setting goals, providing accountability, and those basic leadership functions. And I think to go to the backstory of how did this all happen, I grew up working on farms. So there was a neighbor had a farm, and I was out there picking crops and making $4 an hour. And I mentioned that because I think that's where my work ethic came from. But it's core to like making me who I was. Because I was honestly a kid who was living in the rich neighborhood down the street, who was out in the fields getting dirty, busting my tail for 14 hours a day. And so that ability, notwithstanding the neighborhood I lived in, but the ability to communicate and relate with working people out doing a tough job, I think was central to putting me in the place that I'm at now. And I think it taught me things about like how to be tough and like what was really important. But I was in my college years working for my cousin's farm in the central part of New York, just in between summers in college. And there were migrant workers who were working with us. And that's where I realized I really need a college education because I cannot compete with these people. Like I'm a very competitive guy. And so it was killing me that I could not pick as many cucumbers as fast as they could, or zucchinis or what have you. And so in growing up, I went through leadership development programs, and it just seemed like I had some natural ability to influence others. And people would kind of look to me mostly because I was the loudest guy to be the small group spokesperson or whatever. But I think it planted the seed of like, I really kind of like this leadership stuff. I worked in sales and marketing after college, got into some operations, but back in 2003, this is going way back, but I was part of the first like core values development initiative for a company and got to work on a, from scratch enterprise-wide culture development activity. And I've been fortunate to be on those teams throughout my career. Are you guys familiar with Vistage?
I am not.
Vistage is a international organization that's CEO peer groups. Long story short, one of my bosses was part of one of those peer groups. They get together once a month. They have a guest speaker come in, some guru, right? And this is going back in 2012-ish time period. And so my boss would bring me to the meeting to learn whatever the guru had so I could take that system and bring it back to the office and be like, okay, here's what we're going to do with this sales training. Here's what we're going to do with that operational efficiency thing. And I mentioned that to be like, along the way, I've been exposed to many different tools from many different gurus. And I've been the guy who had to make that actionable for the employer. And so when I start tearing those things up of studying systems, how they actually work in companies, being part of leadership development training, running leadership development training, it's given me a wealth of learning lessons the hard way that makes it useful for saving people from the same pain as they're trying to grow their business.
That's awesome. So let me ask you this, because obviously all three of us, and for the listeners that don't know, because I'll probably in the editing, I'll drop out the beginning of our conversation. So we have Paul here with us. Paul is a friend of Steve and I. I'm actually in Georgia at the moment teaching, and Paul is assisting me. Paul is a retired police officer as well, and a former Marine. Is there such a thing as former Marine, ex-Marine? How does that go?
No ex-Marine.
No ex-Marine.
Yeah, we still eat crayons.
You still eat crayons. That's good. So the reason I'm bringing that up is all of us went through leadership training in the military or law enforcement, right? But I'll be honest, if I, and I've made that mistake as a company owner, if I try to run my company the same way I run my team in the military, I'm not going to make a lot of headway. If anything, I'm going to piss off a lot of people. So how do you teach people to, whatever leadership experience they have, to take that and adopt it, morph it, change it to whatever is the organization's true needs?
So I think the first thing, BK, and you can edit this out if you want, but like the first thing I would do is I would challenge that idea. because I think there are things that you did with your team that 100% translate to a civilian business leadership role. You might have to use different language. Okay, so some of the language that you used with the teams, you might have to adjust that for HR standards to be sure. But I'll give you for example, I was sitting down with a client who's in one of my leadership development programs. He is a former Marine, and he was talking the same way of like, man, if I could just run my teams here the way I used to run the teams there, things would be a lot better. I was like, tell me more about what you mean by that. And he described how there was a authority to what he said. Like if he said it had to be done, it had to be done. And there wasn't a lot of debate and discussion. I don't know if that's where you're coming from too, but he didn't stop there. He went on to describe how with his team, everybody on his team knew he would never ask them to do something that he wasn't willing to jump in the trenches to do with them. Now, I say that aspect of your leadership is as critical, if not more critical, in the civilian private sector world as it was in the military. So I think there are some key things in business that directly translate from your leadership in the armed forces and law enforcement. I think here's the other thing I think I'm sorry to be like challenging your idea,
No,
but
go for it.
I love it. I'm ready to go. I'm like getting amped up here. Keep going, Brian.
So it's like, I hear it from old school people. And so the older generations, it's the military mindset is similar to an older generation mindset. Back in the day, I didn't need any, encouragement or positive reinforcement to do my job. And they're like, why should anybody else need that? These young millennials, they need to be coddled and whatnot to work well. Are there generational differences? For sure. But every single time I sit down with a business leader who says, I never needed, I find out that what they're actually saying is, I never had an environment where I received regular positive feedback. And then when they're saying they've never had it, what is actually true is they've never experienced it, and they don't know the benefit of getting that positive reinforcement and that positive feedback. So I think there are some ideas there. I think, but I'll tell you what, can I share with you the one transformational story in my leadership evolution? It was circa 2002, 2001. I was working at an IT services company in Little Rock. I was really proud of my career. I rocketed up the corporate ladder, and I was frustrated because I didn't have nobody reported to me. And so I'm working across different, divisions and presidents, trying to get these people to do stuff, but nobody reported to me. I was like, man, if people just had to report to me and they had to do what I told them to do, this whole world would be a better place. That's what's missing. Okay. And so this is my mindset. I'm young. I'm in my 20s. I'm in the Dallas airport. The flight's delayed, and there are some really big dudes that are clearly military, but in civilian clothes, sitting around the waiting room with me. And one of the guys said, he's on the phone with his loved one, and he was like, yeah, these Delta people, I could just take them apart. And I was like, that was kind of nice. There's little kids around. He didn't use any profanities. And then I got a chill down my spine because I was like talking to some of my military friends. He's actually talking about dismemberment. That's like, it's his level of like being ticked off right now. So I'm like, okay, great. We get these really ticked off, really strong, super dudes. We get on the plane. I'm in the back of the bus, and it's 3 seats in the row, and I got the window. There's a middle seat, and then there's the aisle. Well, we fly enough, right? You know the rule. First guy to get the armrest gets the armrest for the trip. That's it, right? So one of these military dudes who's ticked off about being delayed gets on and has to sit right next to me. So I'm like, you can have my armrest. You have all my magazines. Here's my peanuts.
It's all sleep on my shoulder if you want.
Whatever you want. I'll rub your feet. I don't care. So, and so we get going. I'm like, I'm nervous. Like, I don't want to be that annoying chatty guy, right? So I'm not saying anything to him. I'm like, nothing. But I'm looking, right? And so I'm reading. He's got a thick manual. His name is Jerry with a G written on it. And the title of the manual is suppressive fire techniques. And he is going through it with a highlighter. He's making notes in the margins. He's like into it. Well, this guy finally says something to me. I was like, that's it. You broke the silence. I'm going in. I got questions. Okay. and so I started talking to him. I found out that he was a platoon leader, had led 2 teams to Iraq and brought his teams back both times safely. He was passionate about his job. And you could tell he was really good at killing bad guys and breaking their stuff. He led a special weapons unit. And my mindset, I'm like, oh my goodness, people have to do what you say, right? And so I want to talk more with this guy, but I get curious. I'm like, all right, so you get all these weapons, right? You have all these things you can hit the bad guys with. What's your favorite weapon? And he sits back and he thinks about it. And he goes, the bayonet. I was like, here's this dude who can kill people from miles away.
You must be friends with Steve because that's Steve's favorite weapon.
I would have said a spork, but that's more my dark side. We don't need to bring that up right now. Therapy's working, and I don't want to go backwards.
It blew me away, and it was. I tell you what, I nenever felt so safe in my life. You know what I mean? I was just, can somebody act up on the play? I just want to see what's going to happen.
So Brian, because this is a topic that I hold near and dear to my heart. BK knows a lot of the leadership. Huh?
Bayonet?
By my nads?
Bayonet? Is that what's near and dear to your
bayonet?
heart?
I'll translate.
Thank you.
Well, oh yeah, that too. And Paul, we've worked the recruiting circuit together, and being a recruiter, you have to have that leadership persona. So, former Marine, former Army guy, I led small units, and being a sergeant in police, I had that same feeling of bringing people home. Now, what I've realized institutionally, although you're in the corporate sector, it's synonymous to, paramilitary organizations like police, law enforcement. There's a lot of issues, and BK knows the issues I've dealt with, but there's no structural leadership. And a lot of times there's an assumption, there's this assumption that, oh, you're military, you could be a good leader, or you're, you went to college. So, that's always been my kind of like battle. For example, I'm at the rank of police sergeant, but I can't get promoted to police lieutenant for 4 years because I don't have a college degree, but someone with a college degree can get promoted right away because they put that above, life experiences, military, etc.
Let me stop you, Steve, because college degree does not correlate to life experience. I would argue that you are
correct. No, I agree. This is what I'm bringing up to Brian from his experience. He can speak empirically. He does this for a living. We don't. I eat crayons and drink beer. All right, but I agree with that. And with me, I learned I had to, like you said, adjust that military experience and what I learned in the Marine Corps. I think the Marine Corps did a phenomenal job developing leaders. And I'm sure you've heard them all, like the algorithms for leadership, for the term servant leadership. And I learned that's kind of like the way I go, not to get biblical or anything like that, but, based off of Matthew, those among you who wish to be their leaders must first be their servants. Right. And I've learned in my time as I've matured as a leader and a person, and that I don't have to yell, that I don't have to be assertive. As long as I'm respectful and I speak to my troops face to face, treat them like they need to be treated, and set that example by, I don't like using the term leading from the front. I like saying leading from the side, because I like using General Patton. I love him to death, although he was a little kooky. He always said, don't tell people what to do, tell them what needs to be done, and let their ingenuity take over and stuff. So that's kind of like the direction I go. So just, I want to pick your leadership brain as to what you've seen, because I don't know if you're in that side, law enforcement, military and whatnot, but I can tell you right now, and BK knows it needs it. It needs it big time. Maybe that's going to be a new branch of your company or something like that, but it definitely needs it. Go ahead, BK. I know you want to say something.
Yeah, let me add something to that, because I had a very similar question. I'll let Brian answer. My challenge coming from the military, and the Israeli military, specifically the special operations side of things, is very big on empowering everybody from the private up to chime in, right? Yeah. And I find that actually American culture suppresses it. So as a corporate manager now, when I ask, and Steve, you've seen it firsthand at our company, right? When I go to someone, I say, what do you think? Don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions. You met this roadblock. Come to me with 3 different ways that you could solve it. And I'll give you the resources to do it. I want you to try and fail if needs be. But people are afraid of doing that. It's like people are like, listen, I'm just going to take the easy path. I'm just going to listen to what you tell me to do. And I'm going to do that, hopefully, but they don't take the initiative anymore, and that's an issue, right?
Yeah.
So, Brian,
Yeah.
so
all right, there's a lot in there. Let me wrap up the Jerry story first, because I think it's
wait. Go ahead. I want to see if Jerry killed anyone on the plane.
So here's the last bit of the Jerry story on the plane, because it took me, I had to hear this, but it took 15 years to set in. And so my hope is that like people get it a lot quicker than I did. Because right after I asked Jerry what his favorite weapon is, I said, Jerry, here's the deal. In business, we study leadership all the time. You're living it on the front lines. Tell me, from your perspective, what's the most important thing about leadership? He sat back and he thought about it again. And he said, your people have to know that you genuinely care about them as people. And I was like, that blew my mind. And so I think that's part of it. And when people know that you're genuinely for them, like that's a prerequisite for any tactic that we're gonna put on top of it. And that's a mindset. I think what's interesting is what you described, and that inviting contrary opinions is so important. And what's funny is we civilians, here's the other thing I want everybody in the military community to hear right now. You guys don't know what it's like to be on the civilian side of this equation. Okay. And so let me just clue you in on things. We look up to you guys as like instant leadership gurus ahead of us. And you guys don't feel that way, but just know that we're giving you more, like a whole bunch of credibility to start with. And that's, I think that's something I want everybody to hear, that we look up to you by default. Like, oh, okay, you're in the military, you must know how to do this. Like, I'm just going to assume what you're doing is right. Tell me I got to walk around, squawk like a chicken. That's what we're doing right now. All right, I'm on board, you know? So I hope that takes the pressure off a little bit, because I think whether you know it or not, you know some core leadership things. Just like that client who knew his folks he'd never ask him to do something he wasn't willing to do. That's a super core leadership thing. You can pay me a bunch of money. I can try to train your managers of getting that. You guys get that by default. You get that by default, that like, you've got to be clear about what your expectations are, and different tactics to be clear. I work all the time with managers who don't know how to make what they're looking for clear, inviting those contrary opinions, inviting the different perspectives. That's something, and I think you kind of said it, but you almost need to train humans to do, because it's very easy, especially under stress and fear, for me to just be like, BK, tell me what to do. I'll do it. I got this problem, BK, just fix it. And on the leader standpoint, I call it like, it's like being an addict. You get a juice from like, oh, good problem, solved it. You got a problem, solve that. I'll solve that problem. And it feels good. Like, I don't know which chemical in the brain is going off, but I'm feeling good solving these problems. It's more difficult to be like, time out, as you were saying, what do you think we should do here? What would the best approach be? Why do you think that? You tell me what the next step is.
And I'll tell you something else that I've seen, and Paul and I are actually working with a big organization at the moment, and we see that often in a lot of organizations we train at, the fact that oftentimes, and I'll be honest, I'm at fault as well at times, things change so rapidly that I don't know what my objective is sometimes. Objectives change. And especially the last 2 years with everything that was going on with COVID and so forth, and companies having to pivot, Steve knows this as well. We closed divisions of the organization. We opened new ones. We pivoted quickly. That is something I learned in the military is, you have the resources, just reallocate. But that's hard. So you say when a leader has to be clear in his objective to his employees or his subordinates in the military or whatever, that clarity is oftentimes missed by the leaders as well.
Yeah, no, it is not easy to be clear. And then once the leader goes, I've watched this so many times. So the leader gets like, they fumble through their words, they fumble with their messaging, they take a bunch of time, they go off on a freaking retreat for 2 days, come up with like what the message is, right? They're like, finally, we had the message. Okay. So now we got to get that out. And they're like, listen, I wrote it down for the folks and I gave it to them. we're done. And it's like, no, you haven't even started. Like, it's like this campaign you have to be on where you have to repeat yourself until you're so sick of yourself hearing your own voice, say the same words, and you're just starting to get through. And so you have to do it again and again. And so that could be a difference between the communities on the amount of repetition. But, I go back to, again, I've never been in the military. It's one of my regrets in life, but y'all drill, right? And there's a lot of repetition there to get that instinct down. And I think, as you talked about times of crisis, it is so important. And this kind of goes to the culture thing of like, what's our mission? What is our purpose? Why does this company exist? Like, how is this company making the world a better place? And if we have taken the time to figure that out and make it really clear, that's going to help us when it gets really wavy and rocky and stormy. Having the core values that we have talked about enough where everybody just knows what they are and how to live them out, those kind of culture development efforts are super important. And what's interesting is that I can pull I think I could pull any military organization and they can give me core values and they can give me a mission statement. They've got that stuff locked down. In businesses, I mean, I'm not going to say who. I got a big client, okay? Hundreds of millions of dollars a year. They've got like 500 service trucks on the road across 5 states. I was down at their office in Baltimore 2 Fridays ago.
And,
yeah, I know. I was thinking about it. I had to run back up. I should have. Next time I'll be down. I do want to go to your store. But this company has been in existence for generations. It's an ESOP. They have no mission. They have no vision statement. They have no core values.
But yet they made it to $100 million worth company.
Yes.
And so somebody says pure luck.
And so I was sitting down with the vice president, who's soon to become the president. And I said something that made him really uncomfortable. I was like, when we talk about these values, these are like the non-negotiables. These are like, if you mess with this, you're not part of our organization. He got really uncomfortable with the idea of non-negotiables because he liked to play it loose and just be like, oh, we can make an exception here and a little bit there. And it took like 10 seconds and we could come up with 3 things that were absolutely no way. Like, you have to be resilient to be in that company. They have a 0 tolerance on any theft or dishonesty. And they're really passionate about doing everything we can for the customers. And I was like, person's name, fill in the blank. You just gave me 3 non-negotiables that those are hills you're willing to die on. But we haven't clarified that for the organization. And it was, so clarity on things for employees. Big warning is that you think you've been clear, you haven't been. You think you've said it enough, you haven't said it enough. And people need to be, that's one of the key things they need to hear from you. And the other thing for leaders is like, look to your roots. Like Colin Powell he said in his autobiography, he never had to use the phrase, and that's an order, which kind of interesting. Okay. Dwight Eisenhower said leadership is the art of getting people to want to do that which must be done. And you imagine this dude like in the trenches with his troops having this conversation. That to us as civilians, we look at you guys of like, you just give orders and people just do stuff and that's all it takes.
I wish.
For the record, I've only ever said, and that's an order, to my wife, and it didn't work out so well.
So, Brian, you bring
a record show.
Yeah. You bring another interesting term, which I wanted to discuss, and that's corporate culture.
Yeah.
The whole idea of culture, right? I'm interested in knowing, A, how you define culture, because I heard many different definitions.
Yep.
And B, how do you determine what the proper culture is, and how do you actually make that a culture in your company?
Yeah.
Or that we see, I guess, not be.
Yeah. No. So thanks. I mean, I'm a big fan of Jocko Willink, right? And so
we'll talk about it in a minute.
Okay. All right. So I'll say what he says, culture is the highest form of leadership because it can direct people of what to do and how to do it without you, the leader, saying anything in that moment. Right. It's a prescription for what to happen when stuff hits the fan. We drop back to these core beliefs. So definition wise, and I was the manager of culture development for one company. So I had to have what the frick does culture mean? Okay.
Yeah, Brian, just real quick, just to clarify for listeners too, because I think I lost you guys, and maybe it's the Marine in me. When we say culture, are we talking generational, or are we talking like a genre base? When we talk about veterans, first responders, corporate America, or is it in general?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so company, corporate culture. Okay.
Are you drinking whiskey, Brian?
Well, I pick. I got beer here. I got whiskey. I didn't know which way you guys want to go.
No, that's fine. As long as it's not iced tea, you're good.
No, it's not iced tea. Yeah, it's something called Green Dot Single Pot Irish whiskey stuff.
I've had the yellow dot.
Oh, cool. Nice. I like it.
We are.
So company culture. Every company has a culture. Culture happens with or without you. So you might as well take an active role in shaping it. It literally happens with or without you. So I define culture as the beliefs and the behaviors that distinguish your organization from other places. So beliefs, those are core values. Those are things that we're really passionate about and committed to. Behaviors are necessary because that's how we translate those beliefs into action. It helps answer the question, how do we go about doing things around here? And the other thing I will say from studying cultures and being actively involved in shaping cultures is you've got two dimensions. You've got the formalized culture, and then you have the informal culture. And I don't care how robust your culture development program is, you're still going to have both. You're going to have your on the wall, on cards values, the written out behaviors, the things that are part of they're written all over the walls. They're in your job review. They're formalized. Then you're going to have this informal thing that happens. Like the company that I'm working at right now, there is an informal cultural thing where if you show up on time, you're late. And, so you have to be on meetings like 5 to 10 minutes early, even for silly little Zoom calls that, you're just there early all the time. That's there's not written anywhere that thing. That's just a way of behaving that we have started and continued with. So that's the definition of a company culture, the beliefs and the behaviors that makes your place of organization feel different, look different, smell different than other organizations. The way that you actively, shape that is like, you've got to get really clear about defining those expectations. There should be something somewhere that I can look at that clearly outlines what the cultural expectations are with very clear, simple, plain language on how I live that out. There's got to be absolute top-down commitment to it. So there was, I'm not going to mention the company, but there was one company where they had a rule where you were not allowed to drink alcohol in a public place with company logoed apparel. They got burned in the past. A few people have a few too many, and now they're a walking drunken billboard for the brand, and they were sensitive to that. So, okay, good idea. And so we hammered this into the organization. And then when you get alone with the executive team, guess what they're doing in airports? They're popping back a couple drinks in the airport in full logo gear. Well, that kind of disconnect is severely damaging. So don't espouse a value or a behavior if you're not religiously committed to living it out from the top of the organization all the way down through. These have got to be hills that you're willing to die on. So clarify them. And then the other big thing is rituals. And so you can inject rituals into your business very easily to bring emphasis to what your core values are. So for example, if you wanted to focus on a behavior of the week or a core value of a month, very easy to inject some rituals. And I'll give you a couple for examples. One, for example, is that at the start of any team meeting during that week or month, we're going to take 2 minutes at the start of the meeting and talk about the behavior of the week or the core value of the month, and wrestle with, like, what makes doing this one easy? What makes it a challenge? How have you seen this lately? Small little 2-minute part of the agenda of a regularly scheduled meeting to talk about the value or behavior of the month. You've got ways of using email, email reminders, but I think, like, the CEOs, and I know it's uncomfortable. I worked with a client, and it's very uncomfortable for me to be in his office, taking a video of him just talking naturally about what these values are and why they're so important. We take those video segments that can be popped into an email, can be sent via text, can be put on the intranet, the LMS system, whatever you're using, whatever systems you're using now to help reinforce these things. And the third ritual, that I would say I've seen done really well is peer recognition programs. Keep it fairly informal, but there's got to be a way where I can just be like, Steven, the way you demonstrated integrity last week with that client was awesome. Thank you so much. And so we kind of get some of this. You don't want it all to be top-down recognition. You want to get that peer recognition. And so 3 simple rituals, once you have your values and behaviors defined, that you can use to work them in. With a couple of the companies I've worked with, we've even had special meetings dedicated to talking more about the core values and the behaviors and what they mean. I think it's absolutely fascinating. I was doing a rollout for a culture development activity I think it was last month, massive food distributor program. And so they've got 350 people that work at the plant, everything from truck drivers, like over the road long haul truck drivers, to office people, to warehouse people, to food technicians. And we were, I was like, let's make it as easy as possible for the people on third shift. So we're going to bring the event to them. We're doing this rollout event where we're introducing these workers to the new core values. And there was a member of the executive team who was terrified of it. He was like, man, you don't understand. You don't understand, Brian. These are third shift, like, warehouse workers. They're not going to be into this kind of conversation. You're going to have a really tough, you just need to be prepared. I was like, okay, let's see how this goes. Because I mean, I've done this enough with enough people. I think it could go another way, but you're the client. We're going to run it anyways. It was the most engaged group. And we were laying out these brand new to them behaviors. And so they haven't had any chance to think about it beforehand. And then we pop them on the spot, put them in small groups, and have them answer 2 questions. Out of these 6 behaviors, which one of these do you like most? And which one of these do you find to be most challenging? It was incredibly robust discussion between these people. And then we shared out what all those different small groups were saying. But they were probably one of the most engaged groups. They were not prepared, had never been part of anything like this. And I think what it is, it just gets to something core to us as humans. When we talk about what's really important, we can have a meaningful discussion about what those things mean and how important they are. So clarifying beliefs and behaviors, using some rituals, that's, like, in a nutshell, really key things to building a culture, because it's going to happen with or without you. It's happening right now.
So Brian, can I ask you a quick question? Kind of going back, you mentioned recognition, which I'm a firm believer of. I always took the time to write out every commendation, whether it was just a quick thank you or something like that to my troops. What is your take in this, speaking empirically from the corporate side, but in this is for any person moving into a leadership role? I'm a big fan of it. I did it to myself unofficially, but a peer review for leadership. So, like, my institution, which I will not name because I don't have permission to do so, and I'm sure they will come after me if I did. But we don't have that. So anyone who gets promoted, basically, if you're good at taking tests and answering questions, you're going to get promoted, and you're going to be, quote unquote, a leader. One thing I did in my first 6 months in my supervisory role was make an unofficial document that critiqued me and how I was serving the troops, what I could do better, what should I continue doing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I've always been, and maybe it's ignorance, maybe it's not, that I think there should be some kind of peer review for someone going into a leadership role. What is your opinion on that? If that's okay to ask?
Yeah, it's great. And I do have some strong opinions on it. Then my opinions are not necessarily going to line up perfectly with my current employer's position, but I'm just going to own them as mine. I think peer reviews are really, really important, not only for promotion. Let's just talk about development, like how you need to grow as a leader. Forget whether or not you're going to get a job. And so part of the leadership development program I do is it forces a peer group where we can give that kind of feedback. Patrick Lencioni says, it is the fourth layer on his pyramid out of 5 of, the 5 dysfunctions of a team: lack of accountability. And he's not talking about like authoritative accountability. He's talking about peer accountability. So Patrick Lencioni measures the health of a team by the likelihood that 2 team members will be able to call each other out on problematic behaviors in real time.
I'm writing that down. Patrick what?
Patrick Lencioni.
Who is that? That's one question.
Yeah, so Patrick Lencioni is a management guru. He wrote this book, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. He's best known for this work. This is where, see if I can find the page real quick. I'm not going to try.
About 4 of those 5 dysfunctions.
So here's the thing with his 5 dysfunctions of a team. Patrick says every team, I don't care how great you are, every team needs work. And as humans grow and develop, they're going to change and need more work. So he says you got to have trust before you can have conflict. You need to have conflict before you can have accountability and commitment, so that you can have accountability and focus on results. And it makes sense. Like if you and I don't trust each other, right? And we trust each other before this call, where I can be like, okay, first question, BK, I disagree with you, right? We've built that trust because like my life was in your hands during training, and like, you know what I mean?
Yes, it was.
I mean, it was like, that was one of the best experiences of my life, by the way. Anyways, we've already built that trust. So I can enter right into, hey, BK, here's the difference I have. Now, I need to be able to mention I have a difference of opinion before you can be like, okay, thank you, Brian, but we're still going this direction. I'm like, I can commit to that because I had the opportunity to voice my opinion. But even higher than that is this ability where we can peer-to-peer call each other out. So I think it's central for development, let alone promotion. And there's Patrick Lencioni has a quote, and Robert Cialdini also calls it out in his book Influence, where he talks about the psychological levers of getting accountability in an organization. And with the whole peer thing, you need to use the natural peer pressure that comes with, like, I don't want to have to come to our team meeting and tell you 3 guys I've yet again missed a goal. And you guys being peers, if we're peers on a team, that peer pressure of not wanting to let you guys down is, Patrick's words, more influential than my boss telling me what to do. So this idea of not only giving each other feedback, but helping our peers is super instrumental to strong, healthy teams. I'm kind of going off on this subject. I want to get to the flip side where so that we believe strongly in that. There's no disagreement. It's how do you get that peer feedback, right? So there's something called a 360 evaluation. And so what this is we get anonymous feedback from your subordinates, from maybe partners outside the organization you work with, from your peers, and from other executives in the organization. I am not a big fan of 360 evaluations because it's personal one-to-one feedback in an anonymous format. I think we need to first build the trust as a team where I can say, BK, I disagree with you, rather than filling out some anonymous survey that says I disagree with BK, right? We want to be able to have that dialogue. to foster that kind of feedback. I've got exercises I do with a team, super powerful exercise. Anybody can do it. It's 2 questions. We go around the room. So if we're a 4-person team, we're going to start with BK, and the rest of us, Paul, Steven, and I, are going to go around and we're going to talk about what is the one thing that BK does that makes this place amazing. And Paul's going to go, and then Steven's going to go, and I'm going to share. And now we're going to talk about BK, and we're going to say, what is the one thing, behavior that BK does that gets in the way of him being even awesomer? And then Paul's going to say something, Steven's going to say something, and I'm going to say something.
Let's do it.
And so it's a super healthy activity that I do with all my clients when we go through strategic planning processes.
Can we do it?
I wish that existed.
No, I think this is awesome. I think so if we're not doing it now, because Brian, you and I met for a weekend. We're going to talk about that weekend in a minute. But, obviously you don't know me as well. But it's something that certainly, I think, I'm thinking in my mind about what would people say during that exercise. And I'm sure I'm way off. That's the interesting thing. I am sure that whatever I think people think of me is nowhere near what people actually think of me. And I would love to see, because I'm all about personal growth. And I'm not good about taking criticism, I'll be honest. Fuck you. But in the moment. But then I'll take it, internalize it, appreciate it, and come back and try to implement.
This is why I always start every critique of you with, I love you, but.
I actually brought this up to my supervisor one time. You typically get critiques from, supervisors to subordinates.
Yeah.
Well, some of the agencies I've worked for, once you got promoted, you could just shy of killing the chief, you couldn't get fired. Nothing happened to you. And I brought up the fact that subordinates need to also rate their supervisors, because
yes.
What Steve, you mentioned that, I agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
You need to have somebody tell you, hey, you're messing up.
Yeah.
And here's why, because if nobody tells you,
it's a scary thing to do, to ask people to do that. It's terrifying.
But you know what, Brian, and you know this because you do this for a living. Someone who makes the conscious decision to be a leader is taking on a huge responsibility, and you should be able to take that critique. That should be one of, quote unquote, like a prerequisite almost. You know what I mean? Go ahead, BK, because you gave me the finger.
I gave you the finger because I found out that when we're on doing this video stuff, unless I put the finger up, you don't know that I have something to say. And then
you know what? That's an actual psychological technique to properly and respectfully interrupt the conversation. Go ahead.
I'm not doing the knife hand. But anyway, so the thing is that, bringing like a 360 to what Brian said at the beginning, and you and I touched on it as well in our questions and in the comments, is people are brought into this leadership position. Because you say people assume that if they take on a leadership position, they should take on that feedback. But oftentimes people are placed in leadership position. They don't want that feedback. They didn't want to be there to begin with. They just got promoted because that was just, like Brian said, you're good at your job, we'll make you a leader. And all of a sudden, you're no longer a tactician, you're now a leader, but you never wanted to be there to begin with.
And they're terrified.
And I think I have to put myself in check there, Brian, because you're in corporate America, and I'm thinking more like that military first responder side where you have to make the decision to get promoted. So go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, it's a scary thing for people to enter into. And there's this idea that, like, if I don't ask, they won't know. If we don't talk about it, then this will just kind of, like, my little weakness will stay here hidden in the background. And it's like, dude, everybody knows, and they're talking about everybody else but you about the issue. So let's put it in a more constructive light. When I do that exercise about the greatest contribution and the thing that gets in their way, invariably I'll have people who are terrified. They're like, no, I don't even tell them what we're doing before we do it. Because if I let them know what we're doing, they'll be like, oh, by the way, we're going to cut that from the agenda. Not doing that.
I'm not making it in.
So they're terrified of doing it. And then they come through the experience. I ask them, so how was it? Based on your experience, on your expectation, your trepidation, how did it actually measure up? And they were like, that was really great. I had no idea it was going to be that good. I got some insights, and, I had one client push me out on, like, how do you get somebody to change? I was like, this is part of it, because, like, I can have you take a test and it says you need to listen more. I could be the external consultant and say, hey, you need to listen more. I could show you surveys from, frontline employees that say nobody listens around here, but that's just nobody. It's not you.
Yeah.
I could give you a book on listening, but until you're in the room face to face with your peer who's like, hey, Stephen, actually, it would be better if you listen a little bit more, maybe not look at your phone.
Only my mother calls me Stephen.
Sorry.
I started calling you Stephen. I feel like your mother sometimes.
Sorry, Brian. I'm a Marine. I have ADD.
No, it's all good.
When you talk about the being receptive to feedback,
the
agency I retired from, which I worked there the longest of the 5 that I worked for.
Such a war.
Such what?
Nothing.
Well, I mean, you got to make the rent somehow. I went to the 2 top people in the department as far as leadership goes, and I expressed some concerns about how one of the other members on our bomb squad was being treated because of some scheduling issues. And there's been other issues I brought up. And the interesting part and extremely frustrating part was listening to these top 2 leaders identify. I never mentioned the name. That wasn't my place as a non-supervisory officer.
Yeah.
But when I described the behavior, they both, oh, you're talking about so-and-so? I was like, yes, I am.
They already know. And that is the culture typically when it comes to that. They already know who the bad supervisors are, who the good ones are, but there's no system in place, Brian, like you've been talking about how these peer critiques and whatnot, they don't exist. And I tell you what, after this podcast, I may put you in touch with my former partner. I'm not going to say his name. Paul, you know who he is, but he's been tasked with developing a formal leadership program for the first time in the history of our police agency. And I think he could really benefit from what you're saying and hopefully maybe get you another client. Because even though I know you work in corporate America, it's synonymous to what we do. Leadership is leadership. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter if you have ranks on your collar or your shoulders or not, when you're tasked, to lead a group of people. And I don't like using the word subordinates. They use it a lot in the first responder military community. I hate that word because I see myself as an equal to the people I lead. I don't see myself as above them. And that just goes with that servant mentality. But I think what you've done in that corporate America easily translates and articulates to what we do in a military and a law enforcement environment. So we might have to open up a new branch for you, Brian.
So listen, I'm happy to do it. Listen, seriously, connect me with that guy. I would say for anybody, here's the way it works with me. We're going to sit down, before we decide any relationship, we're going to I'll give you the best ideas I got. If we ever get to a place, and this is what it looks like, where you insist on paying me money to continue the conversation, if you're a good client, I might say yes to that. You know what I mean? But there's no obligation. And I would love to help your friend who's going through that transition and give him the best ideas I got about what I think might be helpful for his program. I want to go back to something that Paul said, because it goes to that peer accountability. So I was running that one exercise, right? Best thing the person does, one thing that gets in their way. And that Marine guy that I talked about earlier in the program, who's a former Marine, he's part of this group. And he said, and he was wussing out. I was like, come on, man, you got to give me something. That was not a real answer. And I rarely jump in and call people out, but I'm jumping in. I'm like, no, you got to give us something better. He said the same words you did, where he said, it's not my place to say something like that.
It's our culture. And that's what I've, for the last 28 years of my life, I've been told, know your place.
Right. Yeah. And we've all heard the term, it's above my pay grade, which is kind of a cop out. And now that I've matured more as a leader and whatnot, it is a cop out. Go ahead, BK. You were going to say something.
It's funny, Steve, because I love seeing the differences between the American military culture and the Israeli one. Because in Israel, not only are we not going to say it's not your place, we'll actually encourage that feedback from the people that are of I'm not going to say subordinated, but of a lower rank in a sense, right? And you've seen me do that in our company. Oftentimes, I'll go to people and I say, what do you think? Give me your feedback. Let me see. And again, I don't consider myself a good leader by far. I always say that I'm not a good business person, and I always try to learn more, which is why
you have a huge heart.
I don't know about that either, but it's black and hollow. But but I think that that culture in America, specifically military law enforcement, of it's not my place. Comparing that to the Israeli military, where it is your place and it's actually encouraged, that's an interesting contrast.
Well, and it goes back to what Brian said about accountability. When we say accountability, I think we're kind of talking on that, on a tiered level of, from the lowest to the leader and whoever's overseeing them. But accountability goes all the way up to the top, and to all the way up to patriotism. Hold yourself accountable for the place that you live, that whether it's the country, the state, the county, etc. And with Israel, again, you have your enemies at every inch of your border. So it's different. A private can be a hero just as much as a captain or a general, because you don't know. It's going to happen. Everyone has to be ready. It's kind of like what you said, BK, where, in America, you get an award for changing the copying paper in the copy machine, But in Israel, everyone's expected to be a hero. So when you get an award, it's rare. It's something very extravagant or very, heroic.
We don't give medals here in America. I get a medal for, I don't know, you finished boot camp or you peed in the
big
toilet.
Deal.
Yeah, you peed in the toilet without missing the state. But in Israel it's very hard. And we're really going on a tangent, and we can have a whole different conversation. And I don't want Brian's, podcast to be 4 hours long, although I'm having a blast. But
I can listen to Brian all day long and listen and stare at that beard. I'm just saying.
Right? I was about to say that. But this is the thing. Think about it this way, from a leadership standpoint. The prime ministers of Israel, historically, have been generals, most of them for special operations, right? Think about Benjamin Netanyahu, think about Ehud Barak, even the current one, Bennett, right, served in our equivalent of the American Delta Force, right? So we have people that have been there, done that, did leadership for real. And what I mean for real is they let people in combat and brought them home safe, right? And mission accomplished. Those are the people that lead a country. And not to rag on America. I'm an American citizen. I love this country just as much, but you have leaders, some, not all, that are career politicians, never led anybody or anything in their life. And that reflects. That's an issue, right?
Yeah.
So Brian, making a little bit of a 180 here, if you don't mind. So you mentioned Jocko Willings. We spoke about him a little bit when we met last. And I'm a big fan of Jocko Willings. I have all his books, right? His leadership books, and he has 3 or 4 of them that I know of. I even have his kids' books. I think he's phenomenal. Obviously, a lot of experience, and I'm not gonna say anything bad about him because I don't want him kicking my ass if he ever by chance listens to this podcast. But I think his books are phenomenal. But you and I also talk. There's a lot of fluff out there. There's a lot of BS. There's a lot of people that are like, I'm a leadership expert because I served in the military, or because I was in law enforcement, or because I ran a company. How do you tell the difference? How do you know what's good advice to follow and what is just somebody's trying to make a buck off of you?
I think it starts with that attitude of like, there's a lot of crap out there. And so like, just because it's Jocko doesn't mean it's gold. You know what I mean? And I don't know if that'll get me killed, but anyways,
we got you back. We're good.
But seriously, it's funny. I've listened to hundreds of hours of that guy's podcast. He's an English major and he still mispronounces words. You know what I mean? He's got no excuse. So I mean, he's not perfect. The other thing you're going to hear Jocko listen to, I think this is key to your answer, is he'll go and read somebody's textbook and he'll use the line, "We owe this guy money." What does that mean? That means Jocko put in his book, which is selling millions of copies, an idea that was published for free years and years ago. That, in a nutshell, is how I think you distill the crap from the fluff. So I look to, kind of tried and true. Patrick Lencioni, I went through his stuff. This is 20, maybe 15 years ago. Practiced with it, saw it work, saw it referenced by other experts. And now it's like I've got some confidence in at least some of Patrick's stuff. Patrick mentioned somebody else, like, for example, the Thomas Kilmann conflict model. So I go out, I'm like let's see if this thing holds up, try it out, see that it works, use it multiple times. It's helpful for people. And so it's okay. So I think it's realizing there's a lot of fluff out there, realizing that there are only a few deep veins of thought that are actually true. And so when you tap into one of those veins and you trace it back and you look at the different flavors of it, they're all basically the same thing. And you can feel really confident. My favorite thing is like strategic planning systems and accountability systems. It's hilarious because EOS from the book Traction by Jocko Willink, people live and die by it. They treat it like the Bible. Then you got 4 Disciplines of Execution by Franklin Covey. People are like, oh, that's the way we're doing things. Then you got the book Measure What Matters and techie companies like OKRs, which are objectives and key results. And so I had a client be like, yeah, so I'm interested in getting your perspective on these other things because I'm more of an EOS guy. And so I tore them apart. And I'm like, they all have the same 5 things. You're going to get really clear about goals. And they're going to have 90-day goals and annual goals. You're going to focus on those goals. You're going to come up with weekly activities that predict the future. So if I don't do my sales prospecting, that predicts what kind of revenue problems I'm going to have. Weekly activities. Next, you're going to have a dashboard where our progress towards the goals and the weekly activities is highly visible for everybody in the organization. Next, you're going to have a weekly meeting where you and the leadership team are going to talk about what's on the dashboard and how we're doing towards the weekly activities and the quarterly goals. And then you're going to have some sort of like manager evaluation system as part of it. Those 5 things, same as EOS, 4 disciplines, OKRs, I don't care. And what's really interesting is when you study the brain science behind it, this is just the kind of stuff that humans need so that they follow through with what they say. So if I have a goal in my head of I want to lose weight, I might hit that. If I write that goal down, my chances of hitting it go way up. If I take the goal that I was in my head and I've written it down and I share it with you guys, that makes me even more likely to hit that goal, just sharing it. Now, if we're having a weekly meeting where I have to tell you how I'm progressing towards the goal that was in my head that I wrote down, I shared with you, and now we're talking about it, it's not magic of why all of a sudden I'm dropping pounds. And if you look at even look at some weight loss programs, they're just pulling these same basic psychological levers that we as business leaders need to be ninjas with.
That's fascinating.
Well, you mentioned Jocko. I've read his one book, Complete Ownership, I believe is the name of it.
He would kill you for that. It's extreme ownership.
Yeah. And then
I was just saying.
And then you have the dichotomy of ownership of it.
So contextually speaking, I've listened to that. Did it on Audible.
Yeah.
Because you can't read because you're a Marine.
Yeah.
Well, and I was busy killing terrorists with my hands, so I didn't have time.
Sorry, with crayons and sports.
I was engaged in combat. But in that book, the one thing I took away from one, I appreciated so contextually, I know that one book and work by Jocko.
Yep.
He's from a special operations community. Some of those guys can have large egos. He mentioned that anytime that they served with other more standard frontline big army units or whatever the branch was, that he said, we're here with them.
Yep.
We're here to assist them as they are us. And he had an air of humility that I took away from that was powerful.
Yeah.
He said, we need them just as much as they need us.
Yeah.
I appreciated that, first of all, that he was humble about it. From somebody at his level, that's very inspiring of trust and loyalty from a lower ranking individual. Yeah. Second thing I took away that really struck me was whenever he was doing his civilian consulting business, he would go to different administrators, executive level members, and be like, oh, the ground level people having problems, it's your fault.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was huge to me. And I actually told that to my chief after I listened to the book in a very respectful way. I'm like, Chief, things are all fucked up.
With all due respect, as long as you say that first, you are covered.
It was. I felt that to be true. And as some of the leadership roles that I was in as my career ended, I was like, if this is wrong, what did I do? How did I contribute to this failure, and how can I help fix it? Yeah. And so contextually speaking, whoever came up with the idea, and granted, you look at leadership, you have these 3 different philosophies you just mentioned, at least models.
Yeah.
And they may have some overlap, and you may have people that like the person that said it over somebody else.
Yeah.
And you have some people like, well, I think that's stupid because that guy votes the way I don't, or, he likes blondes and I don't. Well, he's an idiot.
Hey, easy there with the blondes.
I mean,
hey, we both got blondes.
Well, I don't. So where am I at with that? I'm still very happy with where.
All right. On that note,
I don't even know what Brian's hair color is because he has none.
It's magnificent.
Look, what it is majestic. Just look at his beard. All right, that's the equivalent of a unicorn right there.
It's multicolored. And no, Jocko was not the first guy to say humility is the #1 trait. Jim Collins I got to hear him speak a couple weeks ago. He's the author of Good to Great. He calls level 5 leaders, like what distinguishes the level 5 leader? Humility. 100% true. And honestly, the one thing I will give credit to Jocko on, because I don't think I heard anybody say it quite the way Jocko did, is that thing of saying, wait a second, this is all my fault. I'm telling you, having put that into practice, I struggle with getting ticked and being frustrated and being angry and getting wrapped in that downward cycle of like how everything's bad and, it's so unfair. When you're able to flip the switch and just be like, wait a second, how is this my fault? Rather than thinking about how is this unfair, let me think about like what I can do better and what I've done to cause this is incredibly freeing. And that's something I try to train people on. The other thing I try to train them on, to kind of go back to talking to your subordinate, I think we all have the responsibility. I've incorporated into my leadership development program a segment on how to manage up, how to lead your leader. You know what I mean? And to
That's
really
awesome.
Bang out of the organization of this idea that it's not your place is not okay. And that it is your place.
That is the first time I've ever heard that.
Yeah.
How to lead your leader.
Yeah. How to lead your leader. Because as a leader, I don't want my subordinates to let me make a mistake. If they see me making a mistake, I want them to tell me.
I like that phrase.
Embrace this idea of like, never let a good boss make a mistake. Like we're on board with the same team. And the other thing I force managers to do, and they don't like doing it, is ask your people. And I've done this with my teams when I had subordinates of like, tell me, how can I be a better leader? How can I be a better boss for you?
And that ties in directly to that exercise you were describing before. I tell what I do well and what I can do better.
Yeah.
Right? So I think
that's something in Israel, in IDF, they trained it, right? We can all learn this practice. Super important.
Well, Brian, I know BK is going to ask you some questions too. And before we put you on the hot seat, because you're going on the hot seat with me, you can't escape that. And I know this list can go on for very long, but give me two qualities almost as prerequisites when someone makes the conscious decision to be a leader that you see them or want them to have.
Okay. Two
top, three top, whatever you feel, but the strongest qualities from empirically speaking of a leader.
I think we established humility is one.
Well, that's an obvious. We understand humility.
So I'm going to use Jerry's words, right? Your people absolutely have to be convinced that you care about them as a person, like that.
So how do we phrase that in one word?
We could say humility, because humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less, thinking more
of the others more.
People get that. So we got humility out of the way. So outside of humility, the two traits that I think are really important are, I think there's a certain level of balanced decisiveness. Here's what I mean by that. So at the end of the day, you're going to have to make a decision as a leader. And that's absolutely critical. I think your lead up to that decision has got to be very collaborative, inviting what's your view on what we should do. How do you think we could do that? What do you think the goal should be? I'm fascinated by when I give any group of humans the opportunity to set a goal. Like I'm like, in my mind, I want them to be here, but I'm like, where do you think the goal should be? They're always like here. I'm like, cool. Let's take that down a little bit and we both win. I get more than I want. You get less than what you're committed to. and we're good. So I think that collaborative process to getting to a decision, but at the end of the day, have you ever seen what it's like to have a leader who can't make a decision?
I have.
It's horrible.
No, sorry, I didn't mean not BK though. I'm talking about
right here.
not BK. I'm talking about other institutions.
Yeah, so I think that ability to be decisive is really, really important. I think it's a skill to learn how to communicate and to be clear and to check for understanding, and that's a skill. I mean, you wouldn't hear what's the biggest problem at this company, communication, as like the number one problem, if we didn't need to be able to address it a little bit better as a leader. I heard a special forces dude answer a question like what set them apart. I'm sorry, I don't remember the guy's name, but I distinctly recall what he said. He said, in our unit, we are experts at 4 things. We are experts at shooting. We are experts at moving. And it's like, okay, yeah, I get it. You move and you shoot. I get it. And then he said 2 more things. He said, we are experts at communication. And I was like, not really thinking about them as poet laureates, right? But clearly that's not what he's talking about. He's like being clear and being efficient with our communication. And then he said the last thing, they were experts at becoming experts. And I was like, interesting. So that ability to learn and adapt is so key. It's the third thing I'm going to layer on here. I've seen a lot of leaders, and you take a snapshot of them 10 years ago and you fast forward today, and they're largely the same. Very few leaders have the ability to evolve. And I'll call this guy out by name because he won't mind, or he will mind, but I'll get over it. Dave Shankweiler. Worked for this guy straight out of college. Worked for him a few years. I went off and got wooed away to the world of IT services and the glitz and glamour of whatever, and did my 12-year prodigal son journey. I came back in 2012. Company had grown, evolved quite a bit. I was like, man, I don't know these new products. I don't know all these new people, but I know Dave. I know how he operates. I remember distinctly when he had to make a decision, his little process for making decisions were good. I know the guy that I'm signing up to be my boss again. And I got back and I realized I was dead wrong. He had evolved. He had changed. He had grown. And that, I think, is an absolute, you don't see it talked about that much, but our ability to improve as humans is really important. Being a better leader means being a better person. And that's on us for how we can grow.
All right. So to sum it up, we got humility.
Yeah.
We got the ability to communicate and flexibility, or the ability to adapt.
Yeah.
And learning, apparently.
And those are your 3 top core values for leadership. So go ahead, BK, before I put Brian on the hot seat.
You're overly excited for that, so I'm curious.
Well, because he commented that he was like a little apprehensive.
Totally dreading it.
So Brian, you and I met during an IWI. I'm going to give a shout out to IWI here in Pennsylvania. I'm a big fan of their weapon systems. Obviously, you are as well. You took their Tavor Operator 1 class, which I'll be honest, I came back and I was so frustrated with myself.
Really?
Because, I don't know if you remember, but when I demonstrated the kneeling, and I was dropping, the snow started coming really bad. It got my eyes and my optic died. And I had to hit that steel plate, and I missed it the first time. I had essentially to walk my shots into it. And I'm demonstrating a skill, and I'm missing the target. And not to make excuses, as an instructor, I essentially point shot it into the steel after 2 or 3 shots, just walking the shots in. But I was so upset with myself. I actually messaged the lead instructor and I said, listen, I'm sorry if I disappointed you. I felt so bad. I went to the range the next day just to make sure my dope is right. I reset everything. But anyways, that aside, this podcast is for silver savages, right? So you obviously have the silver. I'm looking at your beard right now. There's a lot of silver in it. You and I can match that. But there's a savage element.
Yeah.
What do you do to, being a man of our generation,
it's okay.
you do to stay on top of your savagery?
Yeah. I work out throughout the week. So I'll run maybe 4 to 5 times a week, not big runs, just talking a couple miles. I do it primarily for injury prevention, to get my heart rate up, get sweat going, burn some calories, but really warm up the muscles so that when I go to try to do pull-ups, I don't pull something. Back in 2012, I tried to do some pull-ups without warming up and pulled something and experienced such pain. I never want to go through that again. So I'm a lot. And then on the weekends, if it's a good week, I define good weekends with the following criteria. I have run to the gym, worked out, and come back like both days. And then I've been able to smoke some meat on the smoker. Like that's a perfect weekend for me. So
that sounds pretty perfect. When are we coming?
Yeah. So we can talk about that, because I'll make you some pulled pork. It would be great. So when I'm at the gym, it's a lot of like big muscle groups. I think pull-ups are a really important thing. It's just a bias I have. So I'm right now able to do in the teens, with a 1-2 up and then 1-2-3-4 down. So these are not just repping them out. This is like really focused on the negative. So time under tension, I think as we get older, those connective tissues are not as good. Have to like forget big weights and, quick reps. If you get one thing like that that slow decline on whatever you're doing, it has been told to me has been really good. I found it's really good for building strength and that kind of thing. I take, the image that I'm bearing for my daughter and the intimidation that I'm bringing to anybody that wants to date her in the future. I take that serious. So that's why there's the beard. That's why we can be on the beach and I've got a 6-pack. That's why, like, being in that kind of condition, like, somebody's going to think twice before messing with us. And my daughter is Asian, so in our day and age, like, that's a real thing. So I got to kind of be ready that way. I love that class, man. I will never forget. Can I tell a story about you in the class? Because it's funny, BK. I have no recollection of you missing that shot. I do have recollection of the lead instructor, who I will not name, missing some shots. Going, oh my goodness, how did you do that? Anyways, be that as it may. Like, so here's the story. We're practicing like some exercise, right? And so I run out and I have to do a combat reload. And BK gets up in my ear. He didn't even yell. I don't even think he raised his voice. But he was like, come on, let's go, let's go, let's go. And so 3 things happened at the exact same time. First, I was like, I kind of get it. Like, BK is adding some extra pressure here that's going to help with the training. That's designed to create a reaction in me. Like, I'm just kind of observing. Next is I actually felt my muscles tense up. Okay. And I'm right here with the rifle. I'm right here with the magazine, and I missed it. Yeah, I literally, like, I missed it trying to get it in. And I was like, there it is. There is training in a nutshell. It's one thing to sit here and practice doing this. To practice that under pressure is something totally different. And I mean, I went to you at the end of day 1, apologizing, ready to like tap out of like, this is not the place for me. I felt awful because I went through this whole arc of like, before I went to the training at 15 yards, I could do better with a pistol than I could with that rifle. That's how bad, like, I just didn't know what I was doing. I never had a rifle platform like that ever before. And I had practiced a lot with handguns. And I had received no formal instruction. So towards the end of day 1, the lead instructor steps up to the target and shoots this tiny little group, and I was like, there is no way I can do that. And I stepped up and I shot I'm not saying it was as small as his, but my mind was blown. I was like, I can't believe how far my shot has closed up since then. Then you guys added some like little things. I wish we could have just stayed there the rest of the day. No pressure, just plinking that little hole, right? But we didn't do that. We switched it up. We had some elements. I like got in my head, made a mistake, and I was feeling like a complete loser. Like, I'm not supposed to be here by the end of the day. And it was an awesome experience. I'll never forget it. And then there would be these other times where we're shooting, and BK would just walk by behind you and like give you a little push in the back. It was like that's good. That's totally appreciate it.
You did awesome. It was great having you in the class, and I'm certainly glad that we stayed in touch and we had the opportunity to have you in this podcast. So before we let you go, it's the hot seat time with Steve.
Yeah.
And Brian is gone.
Hey, it's your rite of passage into the Silver Savage community.
Just so you know,
they're based.
I went through 22 hours of Israeli-Palestinian conflict podcasts just to prep in case we went.
Oh, well, you're way off because these are based on your hobbies.
I know.
Woodworking, motorcycles, and firearms.
Here we go.
All right. One question for each genre.
Brian, before you start, just so you know, I don't hear these questions in advance. I enjoy them just as much, and that's why you hear me oftentimes chime in because I try to guess.
Yeah, so unlike BK, who has a master's in counterterrorism, you're a leadership guy. I'm a history major. I love military history. I love history in general. I love American archaeology, etc. I take pride in the past.
Can you spell that?
Huh?
Exactly. Carry on.
Exactly. Yeah. Purple is my favorite flavor. So one question based on your hobbies. First one is motorcycles.
Yep.
Right. We are all. I don't know about you, Paul, but we are all avid motorcycle enthusiasts as well.
Okay, Brian, do you have a motorcycle right now?
I do.
What do you ride?
I have a BMW R1200 GS.
Paul has the same one.
Really?
Yeah, Paul, not this Paul. Paul.
No, British Paul.
Yeah, British Paul that we had a few weeks ago on the podcast. And actually, I mentioned to him one of the Israeli special operations team on the police side. They ride the 600 version, but I love those motorcycles. The BMW GS.
Awesome.
Carry on. Sorry.
Thank you. All right, first question. It's a technical question. The rotational force of the crankshaft is transmitted to what part of the motorcycle?
The rotational force of the crankshaft is
transmitted to what part of the motorcycle?
Well, on my bike, it's the drive shaft to the rear hub.
There we go. The rear wheel.
Yeah.
So you see, look.
You didn't say rear wheel. What did you say?
Actually, yes.
Rear hub. Same difference.
I have a shaft drive, so yeah.
Yeah. So look at that. You're 1 for 1 so far. Wipe the sweat off.
Have a drink, Brian. Have a drink.
All right. Next question. Firearms.
It's
What?
At the VOR IWI question.
It's not. It's really not. What 15th century empire was first to incorporate firearms into their infantry formations?
I want to say it was the Chinese with something that was more like a fireworks shooter than the true firearms, but
no, it was the Ottoman Empire.
I was about to say the Mongol.
Really close, just a couple hundred miles away.
Yeah, just a couple hundred, and it was the arquebus.
Okay, very cool.
And the last but not least, woodworking.
I know you feel bad about missing that one.
No. That was intentionally made to not be easy.
I'll tell you, Brian, nobody cares about the Ottoman Empire.
No one really does. No one really does. All right, I'll give you another firearms one to make it up. How about this? The first cartridge-loaded revolver was created in 1856 by whom?
Colt.
Smith & Wesson. Damn it, I gave you a chance.
Brian, I'll be honest, I was about to say Colt. You had a 50-50 chance there. There was one of two options.
All right, last question. Woodworking. All right, I'm an avid woodworker too. What are your 3 basic, and when I say basic types of wood?
I was going to say hardwood, softwood.
Yep, that's one. Soft, hard, and?
Hard, soft, and I want to say plywood, but that's not right.
So, nope. Plywood falls within the genre of that, so I'll give you credit.
Oh, composite.
Yeah, it's manufactured.
Yeah, composites. Yeah.
Well, you got it. Common core rules. You get it.
Common core rules.
That made my day.
So you're good. You see, it wasn't that bad.
Oh, that was awesome.
All right.
I was ready to be like, hey, I can't talk about humility and then get mad about
Brian, thank you so much for taking the time. This was absolutely awesome. I'm sure we're gonna have you back in the future because I have so many more questions to ask, but we already had an hour and 20 minutes. So this was absolutely outstanding. I thank you for your time and for all your knowledge, and thank you for taking the class, man. It was great meeting you.
And next time you're in Baltimore, don't hesitate to call because I want to get you drunk and fill your beard.
We will do that.
Sweet.
All right, Brian. Have a great night, man. Thank you.
Yep. See ya. Bye-bye.
Later, guys. We hope you enjoyed this latest episode of the Silver Savage podcast. Please go ahead and give our podcast a like, share the link with a friend, and help us spread the word. You can follow us on social media as well. Instagram handle is silver_savage45. You can also find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and our YouTube channel where you can watch all these episodes' videos as well. More unique content, merchandising, and events are coming soon too, so make sure to follow.